Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm Tami, fibromyalgia coach, author, and founder of the International Fibromyalgia Coaching Institute. The goal of this podcast is to empower you with access to the dream team of experts and coaches I've discovered are key to living the fibro life you love. From the comfort of your own home, and maybe even your pajamas, I'll help you take back control of your life and health. To help out with Fibro Fog, I always include full show notes and additional resources at fibromyalgiapodcast.com. You're listening to the Fibromyalgia Podcast with Tami Stacklehouse, episode 26. Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm your coach, Tami Stacklehouse. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about the intersection between your fibromyalgia and your faith. Now, of course, as always, I am going to be speaking from my own experience, but I've also got quotes from several of my students and clients and coaches to kind of round out the experience and kind of give you some insight from a few other perspectives. Before we dive into today's episode, though, I have another listener shout out. I love doing these. It's just so fun for me, one, to get your love notes, but two, to be able to celebrate you guys. And I've had several people lately say, yes, please use my real name so my family knows it was really me. So if you want to be included in our listener shout-outs, by all means, just send us a note. You can choose to be anonymous, or you can say, hey, that's me. She said my name. And this note we got a few weeks ago, this is from Susan. And she says, I am so happy I found your podcast. I just got diagnosed with fibromyalgia, which was a self-diagnosis, and finally my primary care doctor and my neurologist agreed. I've been working hard to keep it going with all your wonderful information and tips. I think my favorite so far is saying no to say yes. So very true, and sometimes so difficult to do. My coworkers don't understand why I don't socialize and never have every moment of a weekend full of plans. I just kind of laugh them off and say, I like my quiet alone time. Keep talking to us, Tami. I listen to you on the way to work every morning. It helps to listen to someone who knows the struggles just to get up, get ready, and get there. Thank you. Thank you so much, Susan. I love that I get to be part of your morning commute, getting you ready for work in the morning. That's actually one of my favorite times to listen to podcasts too, is when I'm getting ready, when I'm brushing my teeth and getting dressed, and same thing when I'm getting ready for bed at night. So if you haven't tried, you can have time. Obviously, if you're hearing me, you are listening to podcasts, but that is one of my favorite times. Also, in the car is great. If you are curious about what she said about her favorite so far being saying no to say yes, that is actually episode 12. And this idea, this philosophy is one of the cornerstones of how I live my life. And that is that saying no is never about saying no. It's all about choosing what you get to say yes to. And sometimes, in order to say yes to one thing, it means saying no to something else. And so if you are ever in that place where you can't do all the things and you have to say no to something, just remember it's not about saying no. It's about saying no so that you can say yes to something else that's more important to you. So, of course, that means it's really important to be clear on what those things are that are important to you so you can make your choices count. So if you haven't, go back and listen to episode 12. You'll find it wherever you listen to podcasts. Just look for episode 12, Say No So You Can Say Yes is the title of it. You can also find it on our website at fibromyalgiapodcast.com/12. All right, so you're ready to talk about that intersection between fibromyalgia and your faith. And I'm going to be honest here for a second. I have been meaning to record this episode for a couple of days now, and I've just sort of keep putting it off. And even today, after I got all ready, got dressed, got my makeup on, got my hair done, got all ready to do this for you guys, I just was feeling really unsettled and feeling honestly nervous, which I never feel nervous doing these. I love talking to you guys. And when I sit here and do a podcast episode, it's like I'm recording a voice memo for you as an individual person. And so I hold you in my mind and I talk directly to you. This time, however, I was feeling a little bit nervous. And I realized that it's because talking about fibromyalgia is easy. There's science behind it. We can point to specific things and say, this works, this doesn't work, here's what helped me. There's a lot of emotion that's attached to fibromyalgia, but there isn't that same sense of belief, right? Like somebody could choose to not believe in fibromyalgia, which some doctors say, but we've got science to back that up. And so it doesn't really matter what you believe because we've got an objective truth. When you talk about faith, when you talk about your spiritual beliefs, that's a lot more, I don't even know the word to use. It's just a lot more personal. It's generally a lot more private. And it can also be kind of divisive, right? It can divide families and friends. It's, religion and politics are the two things you don't talk about with other people, right? If you want to make sure you get along. So it made me a little nervous to do this episode. But at the same time, I know that for me and for many of my clients, students, and coaches, our faith, how we interact with the world, our belief in something outside of ourselves, often gives us the strength to go through the hard parts of fibromyalgia and helps us to believe that there's a bigger purpose, that we're part of something greater, that our suffering means more than just our suffering. And so I can't ignore this topic, and we have to talk about it. And I thought, what better time to talk about it than the episode that comes out on Christmas Eve? So here we are. And I realize that all of you listening here may or may not even be celebrating Christmas. You may be part of a different religious background, a different tradition. You may celebrate in other ways. But again, I'm always going to be speaking from my own personal perspective and experience. And for me, as a Christian, Christmas is sort of the core of Christmas and Easter are the two pillars of the things that I believe. So let's talk a little bit about the challenges of fibromyalgia when it comes to our faith. When you're diagnosed with fibromyalgia, there's so many things that change, right? You can't do the things that you used to do. Your body sometimes doesn't even feel like your own. You can't interact with other people. Their expectations of you are not meeting anymore. And so we end up with sort of an identity crisis. We're wondering, who am I now? And a lot of times that even extends into, who am I in my faith? Who am I as a Christian? Who am I as an Orthodox Jew? Who am I if I can no longer practice my faith in the way that I used to? If my body doesn't let me fast, if it's hard for me to get up and go to church or whatever it might be. So we have that challenge, right? And then we also end up with getting extra things sometimes dumped on us from people who don't understand. And unfortunately, some of the biggest wounds that we receive come from the church. If you are in a church that believes that God heals, and maybe the people in your church have prayed for you, well, what happens then when God doesn't heal you? Right? Does that mean there's something wrong with you? Does that mean you didn't believe hard enough? Or that we didn't pray right? It adds all these extra layers to something that's already difficult. I remember years ago when I was starting to see some symptoms, I had a Bible study group that I was part of, and they would pray for me. And they were praying for me to get well. And if you take the short view, when this was happening over 10 years ago when they were praying for me, it seemed like those prayers weren't being answered. But here I am now, so many years later, and I am thankful that God never answered that prayer, because if he had answered that prayer, you and I wouldn't be talking right now. I would not have the life that I have right now, and I would not be helping you. You would not have the help that you need. There's a quote that I love from Billy Graham's wife, Ruth, and I don't have the exact quote, but she basically says that I am so glad that sometimes God doesn't answer prayers, because if he had, I would have married the wrong man many times over. And I think that we see things from our perspective, but the beautiful thing about believing in something bigger than yourself is that there is another perspective, right? It's the same kind of thing as choosing maybe to work with a coach. You can only see what you can see from your perspective, but having somebody else look at your situation gives a whole different perspectives. It gives you new ideas. It gives you different ways of doing things. It gives you a shift in perception that maybe helps you see things a little bit different. And that's what I think faith does for us too. We get to see things from a longer, more eternal perspective of being here because I went through all of the pain that I went through, because I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, because I wasn't healed. I now am in a place where I can help other people and so many other things. So I think that it gives us that outside of us perspective, which is great. And, as a kid, I was taught growing up, and I've been so thankful for this small little thought, is that God always answers prayer. Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is not now. But he always answers. It's just not always the answer that we want to hear. And so I think in my case, that answer was not yet, not now. There's something more that I want to do here. And I want to share more than just my perspective here. And so I have a few quotes from some of my students and coaches and clients that I want to share with you, just to share the perspective so that you're not alone, but also maybe to give you some new ideas to think about. So about a week ago, one of our listeners had filled out a consultation request. She wanted to talk to us about possibly working with a coach and getting some help. And when she had her call, she said this next part I'm going to read to you. And I'm just going to read it to you because this is literally what she said on the call. This is from Erin. She said, one of the downfalls of being a Christian that has fibromyalgia is that you get so many people telling you that if you were really following Jesus' will in your life or whatever it is, then you would be healed. It's so ridiculous. She went on to say, the other day I had to tell someone, when God is ready to heal me, I'm ready for it. But he might not be. Accepting his will in your life doesn't just mean when he's giving you a Cadillac. She said, it's been really hard to say, I will accept and love you, God, no matter what I go through. And I think the experience that Erin shares is one that a lot of people in Christian churches, I do see this in other faiths as well, but those of us who believe that God heals, this is something that we run into, and it's so heartbreaking and frustrating, and just, I think it breaks God's heart too, to be honest, when somebody says, well, if you were really following Jesus' will in your life, you would be healed. And that's just so wrong. I'm not going to turn this podcast into a Bible study, so I am not going to go into all the ways that that is wrong. But if you are a Christian and you're sitting here and you're listening and you're wrestling with that belief, I would encourage you to look up in your Bible all the places where people ask to be healed. And there are times when they are healed and there are times when they are not. And it doesn't ever have anything to do with that particular person. Whether they have earned it or deserved it or prayed or asked correctly. It's just God does what God does. I also want to share just some of the journeys that a few of our coaches and clients have been on. And this one is from Julie. She is currently in the class becoming a fibromyalgia advisor. And she says, when I was at my sickest, I held on to the hope that God still had a plan for me in my life. My view on life had to be shifted to see who I was versus what I could do. As a Christian, sometimes I feel we are measured by our works, by what we can do. Yet I know that couldn't be further from the truth. God has taught me that our worth is in who He created us to be. I remember when I had to stop working because of the pain and fatigue. I was so confused by it. I had a job that I loved and really thought it was where God wanted me. I was a counselor for an unwed mother's maternity home. Now, how could that be something He would not want me to continue with? Yet I couldn't keep up with it. During that time, I was either angry with God or thankful that I was able to be at home and take care of myself. There were times when I would think, how can I handle one more day? Yet I felt like God was always there, speaking to me in a devotional or through an answered prayer. I never felt alone in my pain, and that was something hard to explain. He was and is always right there with me during every part of it. And then she goes on to say that that she believes that it was totally God's work and a miracle when she found me and the International Fibromyalgia Coaching Institute and learned that there was a way that she could help people again. She said, I dreamed of being able to help people, and taking the advisor program seemed the perfect chance. I have the desire in my heart to be a coach and to help others with fibromyalgia. Every step of the way, I have felt God leading me here. I'm so grateful. I also want to read a story from Kate. Kate is Jewish, and she practices in an Orthodox manner. So, things like all of the Jewish holidays and the fasting holidays and the Sabbath and practicing that in ways like not turning on light switches. And it's been really interesting for me, having worked with Kate over several years. Kate has been to a few of our retreats and just learning the ways that she practices her faith. And I can see that there are so many things there that benefit fibromyalgia, right? Like having a day of rest definitely is a benefit, but also that are a challenge for fibromyalgia. Kate says, my whole life, how I've practiced my faith has been based on life experiences. As a younger, more immature adult, I would blame God for anything and everything. I would get upset, I would yell and cry, and I would do that in the comfort of my own home where nobody saw it happen. And there are still days that I do that, but the pain is not as intense as it once was. She said, my diagnosis actually came as a relief because it meant that all of the symptoms I was diagnosed with were something real. So I thanked God for that. But then I hit a brick wall when it came to finding doctors who accepted fibromyalgia as a diagnosis. And again, I would get mad at God. Someone once told me that it's totally appropriate to get mad at God at times. He can handle it. My faith and spirituality has changed quite a bit since I was diagnosed. I'm more open to talking to rabbis and respected teachers in my medical team about how I observed the Sabbath and the holidays with modifications, and that those modifications did not mean I wasn't observing Judaism. It was just a different way of doing that, and the acceptance took a while. Part of that was due to my own pride and self-worth, and I didn't ask for help as much as maybe I should have. I'm much better at it now, but there's always room for improvement. She goes on to say, I've recently moved, and the people at the synagogue are so incredibly understanding and kind and offer so much help. And if I haven't been able to get to the synagogue in a while, when I return, I am greeted with warm smiles and hugs. There are still days where I'm mad at God for giving me this diagnosis on top of everything else, but mostly I consider it a gift because I had to stop doing my job when I was diagnosed, and that broke my heart. But now I am lucky to help other people through the rocky road of life with chronic illness and even get to play with babies a couple hours, a couple days a week. Kate has actually been able to go back to work outside the home, and that's what she's referring there to with that. Kate has put together an ebook, actually, based on her experiences as an Orthodox Jew and practicing her faith with Orthodoxy, and some of those modifications she was talking about. For instance, when you have to take medication with food and it's a fasting holiday, how do you do that? So she has worked out a lot of that stuff, and that's actually something that she helps her clients with. If you're interested in her ebook, it's called Finding Your Faith Within Fibromyalgia, and we will include a link to that in today's show notes. You will find that at fibromyalgiapodcast.com/26 for today's interview. I also wanted to share from two people who have been on the podcast already. One of them is Dr. Robin Pfaff, who was interviewed just a couple of episodes ago in episode 23. So if you're interested in learning more about Robin from Robin, you'll find that at fibromyalgiapodcast.com/23. Robin says, the pain and distress of fibromyalgia and other issues caused me to go deeper in my faith. And I had to work through questioning myself and God. I wondered, what did I do wrong to deserve this affliction? She said, I had to develop a more robust theology of suffering and prayer. There are no easy answers. There are no pat formulas to deal with intense and protracted suffering. Sometimes prayers aren't answers. Sometimes God seems absent. I experienced years of the long, dark night of the soul. I felt angry. I felt despair. I felt abandoned by God. Then I found comfort and wisdom in the ancient liturgy of the church after having grown up in a style of faith and worship that was primarily focused on belief in right doctrine and praise songs. My own suffering eventually resulted in me being called to helping professions like counseling and coaching, and in development of a deep compassion for those who suffer. I developed the ability to endure adversity and the patience and long suffering to walk alongside those whose difficulties last a long, long time and are not easily resolved. And I have to echo what Robin said there. I know one of the things for me as I have, journeyed with fibromyalgia as a Christian is just really coming to identify in a whole new way with suffering. You might look at it as identifying with the suffering of Christ. If you are also a Christian, you might believe that. It could also just simply be the suffering in the world, hurting people, right? I have a whole different perspective now on things like accessibility and handicapped parking spaces. I have a whole different perspective on things like going to communion and having the bread be regular bread when you need to be gluten-free. There's all these little things that the world and our churches don't necessarily aren't necessarily set up for those of us who have chronic health issues. Making sure that not being at church, kind of like Kate was talking about, not going to synagogue, and still having people receive you warmly rather than, oh, you're one of those backsliders, right? Maybe your relationship with God isn't quite so good, otherwise you would be here. It has nothing to do with that. And so I think that can be definitely a challenge, and relating in a whole new way for other people who are in a similar type of situation. I also have a quote here from Julie Hamilton. She is our HR guru, and she helps her clients with things like work accommodations, being able to keep working when they have fibromyalgia. And you will find her interviews in episodes 14 and 15. So you will find that at fibromyalgiapodcast.com/14 or fibromyalgiapodcast.com/15. And those two episodes are on using the Family Medical Leave Act with fibromyalgia and requesting special work accommodations that will allow you to keep working better and longer when you have fibromyalgia. And Julie says, I think through fibromyalgia, my faith has actually gotten stronger. I've learned to lean on God and pray through my bad days. Many disagree with me, but I believe I have fibromyalgia for a reason. My reason is so I can help others, but also to spread the love of God to my clients. Not that I preach to them, but I ask what their beliefs are and if they believe in the power of prayer. I've never been angry with God for fibromyalgia, but I pray that I will be able to use it to help others. I start and end each day with a devotion, along with prayers throughout the day and before each of my client calls. And I have done a very similar thing. It is my act of service, doing things like this podcast or speaking or working with my clients. I am always asking, how can I serve? What am I here to do? What can I offer? How can I show the light of love in a dark situation, in a hopeless situation? You guys have heard me say many, many times that hope is my word. And that's what I'm here for, is to shine a light in the dark and be hope to the hopeless. So this episode has been exploring a lot of things. We've explored some of the challenges, maybe having people at your church not understand why you can no longer do all the things you used to do, and maybe even judging you for it, sadly. It's probably true. We've also talked about your own faith and your own challenges. And God, why are you there? Are you listening to me? Why aren't you healing me? What did I do to deserve this? And finding that place of acceptance and hope that maybe there's a reason, maybe there's some new good thing that will come out of it. As a Christian, one of the verses that I always fall back on is that God works all things for the good of those who love him. And it says all things. This verse has held me up through so many things. It has held me up through my fibromyalgia, believing that God is working good through this. Somehow, some way, I might not know, I might not understand, but all things are working for our good. It held me up through my sister's cancer diagnosis and when she passed away, knowing that all things means all things. That means even with her sickness, her illness, her death, that God was somehow working some good behind the scenes that I don't understand. And holding on to that, even when maybe evidence is showing me something else. Like that's what faith is believing and holding on to something even when there isn't any evidence. And so fibromyalgia is an opportunity for you It's an opportunity for all kinds of things, right? It's an opportunity to strengthen your gratitude practice. It's an opportunity to get really good at saying no. It's an opportunity to make better choices in your life. But it's also an opportunity to choose what you believe and to strengthen that belief and your faith. Years and years ago, a friend of mine at church shared with me some about the 12 steps. He was in AA and I had never been, and I was curious about all of that. And I've never forgotten one of the things that he said to me. He said that the first 3 steps of the 12-step process can be summarized as I can't, he can, I'll ask. And while I don't think fibromyalgia is something like addiction that needs a 12-step process necessarily, I do believe those first 3 steps are good for all of us. I cannot deal with the pain and the loss of my life and the fatigue that I have. I can't, but he can. He's bigger than me. Whatever your beliefs are, God is bigger than you and your pain. Find something to believe in. In AA, they often tell people, like, find something that's bigger than you. Even if you just believe in a light bulb, like, you can't do it. Find something that's bigger than you to believe in, and then ask for help. I can't, he can, I'll ask. And that asking is simply just prayer. Asking for help, for strength, for healing. Like, it's never wrong to ask for that. And I believe, for me, after all these many, many years, I have found that healing. That doesn't mean that I can go back to all my old ways, right? That doesn't mean I can go back to eating badly and, working too many hours and not getting enough sleep and being overly stressed and all of the things that I used to do. But I do believe that we do find a measure of healing. Sometimes it's a healing of our hearts. Sometimes it's healing of our bodies. Sometimes it's our relationships. And there's many, many layers of healing as well. I believe we won't be all the way there till we get to heaven, but on this side of heaven, we will go through many, many healings over and over again. So that is my message to you on this Christmas Eve. And I pray for each and every one of you. I pray for the people who listen to this episode that there's something here that will touch your heart and that will change your life and bring you that small measure of healing of your heart, your soul, your mind, and maybe even your body too. We're working on bringing you all the information that we can to help make that more possible. All right, you guys, stay with us. In the next couple episodes, we're going to be talking all things New Year's resolutions. We're going to be talking about goals and habits and why I think you can set goals even with fibromyalgia and you can meet them even with fibromyalgia. We just have to do it a little bit differently. You'll notice that's a theme. We can do it. We just have to do it a little differently. But resolutions per se, maybe not so much. I'm not a big fan of New Year's resolutions, but I am a fan of making choices and making your life better and setting goals that you can meet to accomplish that. We're also going to be talking about exercise. I have a professional athlete who has fibromyalgia coming to speak with us. We will be talking about how you can exercise with fibromyalgia, but you have to do it properly. So we are going to be talking about the proper way to do that. And then we will be really close at that point to our next Ask the Coach episode. So if you have questions, if you have thoughts, comments, please send them in. Go to fibromyalgiapodcast.com and under the contact menu, you'll see Ask the Coach. And I would love to hear what you would like me to cover in our next Ask the Coach episode. We are also starting to plan our next batch. batch of 10 episodes. I plan these in 10 episode segments. So we are about to wrap up the next 10 and get started on episodes 31 through 40. So if you guys have any particular subjects you would love for me to cover, I would love to have you send that in. And as always, if you ever need any help, if you would like to talk to somebody, get a different perspective, have some support, talk to somebody who gets it and who understands and who isn't going to try to tell you it's your fault that you're sick, we would love to have a conversation with you. Just go to fibromyalgiapodcast.com. You'll see Find a Coach in the menu there, and just fill out a consultation request, and we would love to chat with you. We do have coaches who are taking on new clients. We have people from all different faiths and backgrounds, and I've mentioned a few of them on our episode here today. And I even have space, at least right now, for a couple of VIP clients if you are looking to work one-on-one with me. I do have a couple openings right now, and you can do all of that at fibromyalgiapodcast.com, and in the menu, just look for Find a Coach. All right, you guys, have a blessed Christmas. Have a wonderful New Year. Remember, say no to some things so that you can say yes to what's really important, and listen to your body, listen to your heart and your soul. And remember, don't just live for today. We are looking to get better, which means you got to save some energy for your body for healing. And we will be back in the new year to help you with all things New Year's resolutions, goal setting, habits, all that fun stuff. All right, you guys, love to you all. Talk to you in 2 weeks. Bye. And that wraps up another episode of the Fibromyalgia Podcast. If you're ready to see if working with a fibromyalgia coach can help you feel better faster, visit fibromyalgiapodcast.com, where you can schedule a complimentary consultation to explore your options. During this call, we'll discuss your fibromyalgia journey, what your needs and challenges are, and give you recommendations on how to reach your goals the quickest way possible. Thank you for tuning in today, and join us next time as we explore more ways to help you take back control of your life and health. My music and sound editing were done by Daniel Munkus at Subtle Soup Records. Podcast management and creative copy by Sonia Louise of Performance Podcasting.